Looks like we're looking good. Let me close the door real quick and then we'll get started with our class today, everybody. 1 second. Alright, we are looking pretty good. Let me turn off a few more things here. Hello everybody, welcome to another camera class. My name is Saxon, your host. I want to apologize for yesterday. I was a little under the weather, I wasn't feeling too good, so I'm back today. We are going to be going over the camera basics. Let me get that going on there. Alright, so camera basics, what are we talking about today? For anybody who was here last week last month when we ran through this for the first time, we're just going back over it again as we normally do. However, though, today is, let's start from the very beginning, camera basics. So what is camera basics? We're trying to learn a little bit more about a camera that we are either purchasing or already purchased. Maybe we haven't picked it up in a couple years, maybe we're just graduating from a smartphone, are realizing that the quality of our images isn't what we want it to be, so now we want something a little bit more. So we move into a mirrorless, a DSLR, a point-and-shoot camera, and we want to get the information about that. What we're going to be covering today is a few different topics, but mainly all around the same kind of premise, which is just learning how the camera operates on a basic fundamental level. We're not trying to get into manual control and worry about, how to adjust aperture, shutter, ISO, white balance, focus parameters. What we're really trying to focus on here is just the basic bare bones of our camera. Once again, for everyone joining me, my name is Saxon. Thank you again for coming. I do apologize. Typically, camera classes are on Thursday from 5:30 to 7. However, I was very ill yesterday, so I stayed home. And they did send a memo out, unfortunately, again, since I don't take attendance or do anything for these classes, in the regards of capturing emails and phone numbers. I'm not sure who found out and who didn't. So I, again, apologize for not being here yesterday, but I'm here today. So, jump into it, now that my apologies out of the way. Where do we go when all else fails? Who can help? There's a wide variety of different places that you can go. I like to always tell customers, read the owner's manual, check that out. There's a lot of good information on there. Whether or not you care to read all of it, it's there and provided for you. From there, then, you could always look at something like Imaging Resource. They're a fantastic website, blog style, where they post and talk about different comments and things that are going on in the camera industry that might pertain to you and maybe give you a nugget of information that you might need or find valuable. They have some podcasts too. That's a Simplage underneath. Nikon, Sony, and Canon have their own dedicated websites as well too that have lots of amazing and good information on there. So if you're trying to find out more about your camera specific, you don't really want to comb through comments and all this other information, any of those websites will give you great information on the camera that you've purchased or are looking to get. Nikon has one of my favorite websites, if I'm being honest. And then YouTube. YouTube is my go-to of all go-tos when it comes to information and knowledge. They can tell you literally anything. I had to redo a whole bathroom at home. I was able to go onto YouTube and watch on a tutorial on how to sweat pipes, lay down tile, put a new shower and head in and everything else. It's pretty incredible what you can learn on YouTube. Camera stuff applies in that same world, or in that same vein, I should say. Three main types of cameras that pertain to today are going to be a DSLR, mirrorless, and point-and-shoot and bridge. We're going to talk a little bit more about what DSLR and mirrorless are and what the differences are between those two, but to also bring into it, point-and-shoot and bridge is almost identical to a mirrorless, but in the sense that where a mirrorless can change lenses, a point-and-shoot camera does not. So technology is very similar. However, no lenses come off of point-and-shoot or bridge camera, and that name is interspersed in, between the two. Point and shoot because you literally can point and shoot the camera. Bridge camera because it bridges the gap in between what a cell phone and a mirrorless or DSLR could be, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that term, but that camera is very similar to mirrorless, just no interchangeable lenses. The difference between a mirrorless and a DSLR are pretty simple. The mirrorless camera is lighter weight, smaller in size, because it does not have a mirror. When you're taking a picture, light is the number one thing we need to take a photo. Light comes into the camera, bounces off of a mirror. That mirror hits a pentaprism, and from that pentaprism comes to our optical viewfinder. One flick of the trigger on our camera, we pull up that mirror, we take the picture, it burns it into the sensor, and we're able to then see the image. Where the mirrorless is different is that there's no mirror in there, which makes the action quicker, faster, and better in low light situations, better for video. There's so many different things that are great with mirrorless that have been improved on from its DSLR counterpart. The last thing I will say within that, though, is that mirrorless cameras are typically lighter weight, they're smaller in profile and size, and mirrorless is now the #1 camera seller in the world. Surpassed DSLRs years ago. DSLRs are still useful, they're still worth some money. However, though, within the next couple years, within this next year specifically, most brands are going to discontinue their DSLR lineup and just focus in on mirrorless. So be prepared for that if you are still a DSLR shooter. Not to say your technology and what you have is going to become obsolete, but it will become a little bit more out of date compared to the newer stuff that's on the market. If anybody who's watching has comments, questions, or concerns, you can chat away. I'll answer your question live as long as it's appropriate. Before we jump into anything else, let's talk about pictures and where they go. Your memory card is going to be one of the most important pieces you pick up besides the camera. Picking up a memory card is your storage. It's your ability to save photo and video from your device. And I like to also explain it as a vehicle, which I'll talk about in a second. I typically recommend to buy at least a 64 gigabyte or higher. Even if you say you have no interest in video, 64 gigabytes should give you about 30 to 45 minutes worth of video on top of whatever photos you're taking. In that case, it's a nice just kind of thing to have in case you do need the extra space. However, always have 2 of these cards on you. They have small copper contact strips in the back. Those can become worn out or burnt out after some serious usage. From there, then you're going to have to make sure that you insert it in and out properly. And having a second one is great, especially if that one card goes and dies. At least you have a backup card. I look at it this way: if you're on vacation, you go to the Galapagos Islands and you're walking around and your SD card doesn't work on you there. Well, now you brought this camera with you. What are you going to do? You don't have any other way of saving the photos. If you have a backup card, at least now you're saving yourself the frustration of dragging this out, using it, and not having the ability to save photo or video. So have 2 cards, buy something at least 64 gigabytes or higher to have that extra space. And depending on the camera model that you use, you might want to look into some higher end cards. It's all based on the camera that you have and what you're using on there. I could sit there and tell you about every difference between all the different cards and everything else, but I do think doing a little research on the model that you have will help you dictate what card you need. And if you really need help with it, come on into the store, call us up at Apt, and we'll walk you through the process over the phone, help you pick the right card. But let's move on. Your picture shouldn't live on the memory card. This is where I like to view this as a vehicle. If, let's say, our camera is our house and our computer is work, the SD card is going in between the two to take us from point A to point B. Meaning that the photos aren't meant to be permanently in your SD card. They're meant to be moved from device to device, from item to item. And the way that we do that is by transferring the photos from one to the other. Once they've been transferred from the card to the computer, you can delete the photos off the card, and you should. This clears up space, but also then makes it easier for you to track and follow all this stuff, just so that way it's not getting lost or kind of thrown about. So there's a lot of good purposes for that. My steps to make sure you don't lose anything. So let's start by turning your camera off and waiting about 5 seconds. This gives the camera, your device, a chance to power down, to make sure that all pieces or all movement is completely done, and that there's nothing else needed within the camera, no actions needed within the camera in order to move to the next point. Once you've done that, remove the card and place that into a card reader. I do recommend trying to avoid using the camera, only because now you're cluttering your desk with more items and options, and there is a better chance for something to become unplugged, which could disrupt the transfer and ruin whatever photos or work you just did, and they could be lost. So try to avoid using the camera, put the card into the computer via a card reader, and if you don't have one of those, you should use a good one. Find one. They're out there, they're not expensive. That trifecta in the middle there is about $20. It's one of my personal favorites. It's like a USB thumb drive back in the day. Plugs into any of the new computers or old computers. Fits both standard and micro SD cards. So again, depending on what you have, it works really well. There's also some other higher end ones that you can look into. All are great options. Never going to sit there and say that one is better than the other. However, it really comes down to what you like, what you want, and what works best for your setup. I personally think the trifecta for someone who's on the go and on the run is a great option. Continuing that process, after we've gotten our photos onto the computer, we've plugged that SD card in, we want to copy the photos to a destination folder. Don't move them, copy them. By duplicating them and moving them from one to the other, we're basically lowering the risk of it getting lost during transfer, because instead of us moving it and the possibility of losing it in between, we're just moving it to one, or copying it to one section. If that goes wrong, it's still on the other SD card or on wherever else we're getting the photos from. The destination folder can be found either using Explorer or Finder, depending on the service you're using, Windows or Mac. The other thing to keep in mind too is you want to label your destination folder something appropriate that you're going to be able to find these photos. If it's Christmas of 2025 and you were with family, let's say your wife's side or your brother's side or whoever it is, you might label it the Smith's Christmas Party 2025. You might then take all those photos you have and put them into that folder. But what's good about doing something like that is you're labeling exactly what event it is that you have these photos from, and you now have it in a folder that dictates that same thing, making it easier for you in the future to find those images. If someone texts or calls or asks you, hey, do you have those photos from a couple of years ago or from last holiday season, rather than you scrummaging through all your photos, desperately trying to find whatever it is you need to send to your friends, you can easily locate it just by going to the search bar on your computer and typing it in. The next thing you want to do is to copy those photos to a second place. We want to use either an external hard drive of some sort or a cloud-based solution like Prime Photos or Google Drive. Next thing we want to do is eject the card before physically removing it. Make sure that we properly eject the card so that way no information is lost. Once we've done that, we can format the card back in the camera. Formatting will erase old information on the card, and you can also delete them while still in the computer. Whatever works best for you. I rotate between about 3 or 4 different cameras that I use for my film and photo work. So for me, I will reuse the same card on certain cameras, so I want to make sure I format every single time to prep that card for the camera in use. It optimizes storage, also deletes all the information off of it, giving us a little bit more peace of mind and ease of use when using this. So again, your backup plan, so we're all on the same page. You start with the SD card. The SD card gets plugged into the computer via a good card reader. Again, you can invest in that or do exactly what you want to do. From there, then it should be then stored onto a secondary place. That would then be your hard drive or your cloud-based solution. I personally am a hard drive user. I think they're great. They're tangible items. They're easy to find. I have a few of them in the house. I even have one that I keep in a safe that has all of my photos and video and art that I've made for the past 20-something years. so that way if anything bad were to happen in the house, I at least still have that available for me to find. However, I would recommend trying a cloud-based solution. I might not use one personally, but if you're someone who's constantly on the go, you're saving photos left and right, you want to make sure that they're easily accessible. And if someone wants one at the touch of a finger, you can email any of these photos or message any of these photos out to make it even more convenient for the other person. So there's a lot of great resources out there. It's not a bad idea to look into the cloud-based solution options to optimize your photo sending and forwarding abilities. So let's go through a tour of your camera. We're going to talk about all of the buttons on there. Now, the images I'm using for this are of a DSLR body. The DSLR body, while great, the DSLR body has a lot of extra buttons on there that might not be in the same vein as what's on mirrorless. However, all of these buttons still exist within your camera. Now, when we go through these, if there's something that you see or something I mentioned and you want more clarification on the button, please do ask. Since I'm not doing this on Thursday, I do not have anybody in front of me present, so I don't have anybody to ask questions based on what I'm going to say. So I'm going to say what the button does, how it functions, give you a little bit of backstory on it if needed. From there, then, if you have more questions or you want to know, chat in and ask them. I will answer them live for you. So without further ado, let's get into the main part of this class, which is the tour of your camera. The red button on the top of your camera or side of your camera, it could be a red button or a red circle, is typically the video start and stop. As it says, it starts or stops the video automatically. You don't have to preset anything or do anything extra. You press the button, you'll hear it beep that it's recording. Press it again, it should beep that it's stopped. The power switch is usually located around the shutter release. Those two are right next to each other. This power switch toggles the camera on and off. The shutter release, if you half squeeze it down, will take a focusing of a photo or whatever you're trying to shoot. Full squeeze will then actually take the photo. Exposure compensation also exists on the camera. This helps you make the photo darker or lighter depending on the settings that are being used. Very useful if you've already gone through and manually controlled your camera and it's still not giving you the result that you want. The mode dial. I like to look at the mode dial as the driving force of your car or of your camera. Think about it this way, that if you're using a car or driving, you use your gear shift to switch you between park, neutral, and drive. The same thing can be said for your mode dial, where you're now dictating if you're in manual or automatic or shutter priority, aperture priority, that sort of thing. Live view switch. Now, this button has changed over the years. Back in the day, a live view switch was pretty necessary because it switched your mirror from being turned down, which then allowed you to view through the optical viewfinder, and then your screen, which then it would let you look through in that one. Nowadays, it should be the display button. When you press that, that's what's giving you the ability to toggle and change your menu system and screen to get it customized for your liking. And then the command dial is the last one that I'll talk about. The command dial is basically your beginning, your ability to switch certain features on there. That could be the shutter speed, that could be the aperture, depends on the camera model, make, and what exactly is going on. Typically the command dial lives in two different modes, or two different sections. That back section, and then there's also one usually at the front next to the trigger. The reason that's there is so that way you're able to adjust both shutter, aperture, or ISO, or exposure compensation, depending on how your camera's set up. So the command dial and mode dial are probably one of the few things that swivel or spin like that, other than the dial pad on the camera, which some cameras have it, some don't. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there, but that's really what that is. Now again, these features you're seeing on here could be located right where you're seeing them. They also could live somewhere else on the camera body. The idea though is that when you see this symbolage and the images and everything else, it'll help you locate them in the future when it's time for you to play with or set different things on your camera. We're going to just want to make sure I put this in everyone's mind. Start with automatic. As much as I like going to the manual control or aperture or shutter priority, I'm going to be honest with you, for the beginning users, and this could be someone also who has used cameras for a long time and hasn't picked one up maybe in 5 to 10 years, start with automatic. I know it sounds silly. You're paying all this money for a camera to let it dictate and do all the work for you. However, automatic is, to me, one of the best ways to get into photography without necessarily overburdening yourself and stressing yourself out. There are a lot of cool features within the camera that are available to you, the photographer. However, without that base knowledge of just shooting, getting the framing right, and taking a nice clean image, jumping into the more manual and specific controls oftentimes can turn people off to this shooting style. So start with automatic, let the camera do the work for you. You focus on taking good looking and pretty photos. That should be your job as a photographer when you're first starting out. And as you start to develop and figure things out and you become more comfortable and more fluid with your camera body, that's when then you really can have some fun. Start learning the manual controls, the aperture, the shutter priorities, what white balance is, all the good stuff that will really hammer out in advanced photography and intermediate photography next week are all options that, again, as you get better in practice, you'll learn. All mode dials are slightly different. All brands do it a little differently. Do not be scared of this. Do not worry about this. This is just their way of making their cameras unique. This is where learning the different features on the camera is important and it's necessary, because this really will give you a better understanding of what things do what and where they're located, so that way when it comes down to it and you do start feeling more comfortable, you have a frame of reference to go to when it comes to just picking the right spots and doing the right thing. To give a little bit of a rundown there, Auto, or A+, is auto control over settings and functions of the camera. M, full manual, is control over the camera's array of functions. So full manual control over everything. S, or TV, is shutter priority control. A, or AV, is aperture priority control. P is program auto. So program auto is a nice way of you being able to let the camera still do what it wants over auto, but now you have things that you can customize and control. B is for bulb, which a lot of cameras don't have this anymore, but it's something you can still access via some of the menus. That's when the camera is still fully customizable, but as long as you hold down the shutter or you press it once and press it again, it'll keep that shutter open for long exposure photography. Really cool things you can do there. I won't bore you with those details now unless you want to know about them. You can comment and chat, but great if you're trying to do photos of traffic or water or the sky. Cool things that can be done with the keeping the camera fully open and taking long exposure shots. And scene modes, which again, let's see them all on there. So again, you see those ones there. You'll see customizable settings, things that when you set them, they stay that way until you change them. But you can also see these other automatic modes called scenes. Really the idea behind it is that you set your camera to one of the scenes and it'll then stay on that. So if you're trying to do macro photography, they have a mode for that. If you're trying to do portraits, they have a mode for that. Action, landscape, nighttime photography, anti-flash, things with a built-in lesser flash. There's so many things that you can choose from scenes. However, they all are just forms of automatic, and I'm not necessarily the biggest scene user, so I'm not going to tell you to use them, but I'm also not going to discourage you from using them. I think that automatic will do the trick just for you, just enough, and that you don't need the extras. So the Thunderbolt symbol going downwards is the flash button. Press that. That should then engage the flash. FN, or function, is a multi-purpose button. So there's going to be a button that we see on some cameras that says I, some that say Q, some that say FN. There's a lot of different things they can do. One of the ones on the new mirrorless cameras, if you see a Q, an I, or an FN, are typically they open up a shortcut menu. That shortcut menu then gives you the ability to switch between a few different settings on the camera. This then giving you really fantastic control over things like the focus parameters, white balance, ISO, exposure compensation, things that will help dictate the photo rather than just the manual control. Sometimes though the function button will then just give you a controlled setting that you're able to change and shift. All cameras are slightly different in this regard, so keep that in mind when playing with it. The FN button has a lot of different things it can do, but again, it's a function button, so that's its main purpose. The zoom ring, pretty self-explanatory there too. Turning that one way or the other will zoom in and out of your image. The focus ring, when not turned on automatic focus or AF, you'll have MF, manual focus. Manual focus then gives you the ability to manually control the focus of the camera. It's great for video. I'd highly recommend it. If you're not, you're just doing photo, I think autofocus you can get away with. But again, everyone's a little different. Lens retract button, it's not something you see on modern cameras, but if you have one of these, it's the locking mechanism at which the lens then locks into place and doesn't move. Again, you might see this really just for older lenses that don't have motors in there. It helps a lot that they don't shift when being used. Lens release button. Pressing this button and then turning the lens clockwise or counterclockwise will remove or put a lens onto the physical camera. Drive mode button. So you're going to see a stack of squares or what looks to be a timer symbol. By pressing this button, you're going to be able to switch between burst photography or single frame photography, and then you're also going to be able to put a timer on your camera. Now, I'll talk about it towards the end of class, but they have apps now on the phone that you can download in order to do the same type of control. But you can always set it right from the camera, especially burst photography if you're doing sports or action. You can take it where it shoots like an NFL game, where when you're watching, it's sounds funny as I make the noise, but that is the true case of this camera and what the drive mode can do. Menu button takes you into the more advanced settings of your camera, whether that's time or date, Wi-Fi connectability, or Wi-Fi capabilities. That could also be your ability to switch things like what your auto ISO is and how high that can go, certain things like that. Diameter adjustment is for anybody who has seeing problems or vision problems. You can adjust the viewfinder's diameter so that way you can see through it. It's adjusted in a very similar way that binoculars are set up. So I like to always mention that. If you use binoculars or have used them before, the way that you use binoculars and go through and zoom in and out, or not zoom in and out, but change the diameter, is the same thing that you'll see on a camera. The info button can be a whole bunch of different things. On cameras like this, the info button typically was there as an educational resource or tool. You press on the info button and it'll tell you a little bit about whatever setting you're on or whatever focusing parameter or whatever it is you're trying to use to give you, the user, more information on that. Exposure, focus, or lock. Basically, if you're holding this button down, it's going to start to focus on for you or lock in the focus or exposure that you're seeing. As you move around, the camera will stay on that exact setting. So, not a bad tool, not a bad thing to use, especially if you're taking pictures of the same subject matter. I had a student in class one day who asked about that button, and she had the perfect use case for it. She was taking photos for her friend's new restaurant. They were setting up a page on Uber Eats. She needed to take photos of different dishes as her friend prepared them, so that way it could then be put onto the app. I then told her to use something like this, and so that way all she had to do was lock in the exposure and the focus she wanted, and then just slide the plates out from underneath the camera and take the same image over and over and over again. And it really worked out well for her. She was able to get it done within a day. So stuff like that, that's really what we're looking at is for ease of use. And cameras typically can have that, you just got to know what to look for. Image playback button. By pressing the image playback button, you're now going to get a playthrough of all the photos you took. The I button functions very similar to the FN button. It gives you a singular command, gives you the ability to change multiple things in command, also gives you the ability to possibly go to a shortcut menu depending on how many of these you have and where they're located. The OK button is pretty self-explanatory. That's your enter button. Multi-selector. Now I talked about the command wheels of the command rings, command dials, having the ability for you to turn in order to then get control over one thing or the other. So if you're setting your camera up on shutter priority and you turn that dial, it should then control the speed of your shutter. Well, in the same thing, the multi-selector is one of the 3 wheels on your camera that can rotate fully. Magnifier and demagnifier are pretty self-explanatory. You take a photo, you hit the image playback button. From there, then you're able to see the images you have. You can then zoom into them to see the quality and check that all out. The delete button is then there, so that way you can delete the images that you don't like. This is a photo that a customer of mine sent me a while back. And I do love this. I do love this photo a lot. Now, why I love this photo so much was that this customer came in, they bought this beautiful camera from me, they take it home, and I immediately the next day get this email that their camera does not work. They went out for drinks, they were so upset. They bring it in, I show them a few tricks on there, we get it to work immediately. This is a great example of not understanding the manual control, jumping into it fully manual, expecting it to do what your phone does. Your camera isn't a smartphone. It's very easy for us to forget about the times before smartphones if we're old enough, or if we even remember this time period when there was no camera on a cell phone, or if we did, it was a rinky-dink little camera that would take a real bad image, but you got the meats and potatoes of what it was. Cell phones have made photography so much easier. And I don't like the debate that people have sometimes where they sit and they say, oh, the cell phones are ruining the true art of photography. The art of photography is always around, and phones try to make it even more artistic every single year that a new model comes out. It's not their fault. They've made it easier, though, for everyone to take photos. I have a joke for that same way that I don't think America's Funniest Home Videos are that funny anymore because we always have a camera on us, whereas back in the day, you'd be lucky to get those shots that you did. Regardless, though, your camera isn't a smartphone. It's an important thing to remember. Your phone and your camera can do identical things. However, the camera must be set and must be changed in order to get to that point. It's not just something that automatically happens. Typically, it takes a little bit of time to fully understand and grasp the capabilities that your camera has to see the beauty and the effects that it can do. So be patient with your camera. Don't sit there and demand too much of it without understanding what you need to understand, and just be prepared for learning curves. As you get better with your camera, you will learn that everything the phone can do, the camera can do better. It just sometimes isn't as quick or as responsive as we'd like it to be. This is a simple one, but I like to talk a little bit about it before we end with lenses. Holding your camera, it might sound really simple. Hold it from the bottom. Keep your elbows in nice and tight so nobody can bump you and knock it out of your hands. And try to keep your back straight as best as possible. Your right hand goes on the physical grip of the camera. Your left hand either goes underneath or on the lens of the camera within the palm, keeping base on it. This just helps you take better photos, but this also just helps you keep stability with the camera model that you're using. It's very easy to think that my camera's not that heavy, I don't need to worry about it, but then once you get it in your hand and you start playing and shooting, you realize how heavy actually it is. Focus, then shoot, and shoot through the picture. A lot of people will just rapid fire with their cameras. Focus it. Focus the camera, do the half squeeze on there, press the exposure lock on the camera, whatever it is you need to do in order for you to get the proper read on whatever image you're trying to take. Do that. You'll thank yourself in the long run. You'll have less blurry or, not good quality photos through that time. There's a lot of benefits to doing that. So just take your time, focus through the image, half squeeze to focus, and then pull the trigger to shoot through the whole image. It's an important aspect. It seems silly, but it does go a long way. If you or the camera are moving, you're going to get blurry images. I unfortunately don't have a way around that. There are a lot of artists out there that have made millions of dollars through taking blurry image photos. We're not that artist. We're our own person. We're trying to learn the basics of cameras so we can take the best photos for whatever event or thing that's going on. So keep that in mind. My big talking point, other than the fact that I have no voice today, is to date your body and marry your glass. As a photographer, we are constantly battling or going through the new camera bodies, the new technology that's constantly coming out, updating. However, if we can invest money in our glass, we'll never go wrong. For the most part, the glass keeps its value, unless it's obviously a kit or an entry-level lens. You buy a new camera that has a great lens to it, you're gonna then have this lens for a long time. And if you can take care of it and use it properly and just be delicate, not even delicate, just don't damage your lens, it'll go a long time. So date the body. The body will become outdated, obsolete, broken, but the lenses are the main selling point. Those are going to last forever if properly taken care of and used right. Focal length and zoom are the same thing. As we zoom into a subject on the image, not only will that image or that subject get closer, everything around it will. From 70 millimeters, getting a wide angle of the swampy, marshy area, as we zoom into 400, and now we're on top of the birds, that forest green area is in front of us too, everything is moved up even closer. Focal length, though, also can lead to compression. So it's important that when we're picking out lenses and we're thinking about focal length, we understand what we're using it for. Typically in portrait photography, 35 to 75 millimeters is a great entry, or is a great portrait taking zone. I'd say even up from 75 to about 105 millimeters, we're getting a good shot that doesn't distort our subject matter, make them too skinny or narrow or too fat or bulged out. This really does help make sure we take a perfect portrait based on the landscape and what we're trying to get. Remember that the bigger the lens, or the bigger the millimeter size, the tighter the focus becomes, meaning that the more space we need to give between our subject and ourselves. As we start to get to like a 35, a 50, 75, 105, we have a little bit more room to play with. Therefore, we don't necessarily need to back up and be too far away from our subject. As we change those lenses, though, if we're not in that 35 to 105 range, we're now getting into a more fleshed out, bulgier face or fatter face in portraits. That's from having too much zoom, or we're getting this very narrow, compressed face from a too wide of an angle position on our lens too. So keep that in mind when we're shooting and we're practicing and playing with this stuff. We gotta have the correct zoom, we gotta have the correct lenses to get the job done to avoid compression or distortion of our image. Alright, lastly we're going to look at some common lenses. I'll tell you what lenses you need, and then I'll tell you guys to have a great night. We'll get ready for next Thursday's class, which will happen. I shouldn't be sick. Hopefully I recover from whatever I've got this weekend. So common lenses. You go out, you buy a camera, you're looking to buy a camera, what should you buy? I always recommend for beginning photographers, start with a kit lens. Your friends, your photography buddies, your dude that you went to school with when you were in grammar school, who now is a photographer, might tell you otherwise, and that's completely fine. Take it for what it's worth, listen to what people have to tell you, and you form your own opinion as an educated adult or an individual. However, I will say that a lot of the times people will come in with the mindset of buying one lens or XYZ lens to get their job done. And the hard part or reality of this whole thing is that not one lens is perfect for one thing. All these lenses have an array of functions and abilities, and what's cool about them is that we can purpose them for whatever it is we're trying to get done or to do. Kit lenses are a great example of that, because kit lenses offer you, the user, an inexpensive lens that can kind of do a wide variety of functions. 18 to 55 would be a great wide angle to portrait. Are you going to be able to get the bird that's flying in the distance 200, 400 feet away from you? Probably not. But are you going to be able to take great pictures of family and friends in the holidays or parties, or every once in a while when you're traveling or meeting people? Absolutely, this camera would be the one for you. Not only that too, but it's a kit lens, so the lighting on this isn't going to necessarily be the best. Where we see that is on the very top of the writing of the lens. We have AF-P Nikkor. That's calling out the quality of lens. It's a Nikkor glass. We have an 18 to 55 millimeter. That's calling out the zoom or focal length. And then we have the 3.5 to 5.6 G. That's calling out the maximum f-stop on this lens, meaning that at 18 millimeters, the best aperture we can get is 3.5. That's going to let in light, help blur out our background, and keep our foreground and our background separated from one another. As we zoom into 55, it's going to change to 5.6, meaning that the lowest number we can physically get is a 5.6 aperture. So the lighting on it isn't great for indoor photography when there's low light. If you're shooting in almost darkness at a nightclub, this is not going to be the lens for you. However, it's Christmas time, you got the trees going, you got all the lights and everything popping off. This would be fantastic for that. The camera can read all the light, see everything, and this is a great lens to get you started through your photography journey. without you necessarily getting into something way too complex or complicated. This gives you the ability just to start with something nice and easy to then gradually move up into other products. Now, while that was a kit lens, that was also a zoom lens. This lens is not a kit lens, but it's also not a zoom lens. We would call this the Nifty 50 because it's a 50 millimeter and it's pretty darn nifty. Or we would call this a prime lens because a prime is a single number, which is a 50 millimeter. The 50 millimeter is going to be one of the most perfect lenses for portraits. That's why they call it the Nifty 50. It sees the same way the human eye sees. However, it's a 1.4 millimeter lens, 50 millimeter lens with a 1.4 aperture, meaning that when you talk about it letting light into the camera body, it lets light in unlike any other lens. It's one of the most maximum amounts of light we can let in. We can blur the background out really nicely, separate the foreground from the background, and take a perfect portrait with no distortion and no compression. It's a great lens. You'll see lenses like this in 35. You'll see lenses like this in 75, 85. You might even see a 105. Prime lenses can be macro lenses too, which give you the ability to take really up-close, detailed photos. I've got a lot of people who are birders or insect people, and they love taking pictures of different birds and insects or just reptiles, anything where they can get real close and get the scales or the feathers or the claws or any of the other stuff that's going on with some of these creatures. It's really cool what you can do with these lenses. Now, I mentioned this earlier. Zoom or telephoto. This is another set of lenses very similar to our kit lens. It zooms typically from one number to the other. 24 to 70 for the one, 70 to 200 for the big white lens that's on the screen. Again, all different use cases, but one thing to keep in mind with these is that they have a really nice aperture. However, you can get lenses that have similar apertures to kit lenses that don't cost as much money as what these two would be. Both of these lenses are about $2,200 to $3,000 each. You can find similar lenses that have a little less light that gets let in, and they're a little bit cheaper in quality. That only costs you maybe $500 to $700, which still does cost a lot, but photography is not for the faint of heart when it comes to prices. Cameras are expensive. What's the difference between a prime versus zoom lens? Really the biggest thing is that a prime lens is a single number. Typically it has the best aperture that you can find on the market for these. And when you're using the prime lens, you yourself have to move backwards or forwards in order to get the proper shot. With a zoom lens, they're heavier, much heavier than the prime lenses. They typically will give you great distance on a shot. You don't have to move your body, you zoom in and out. But typically their aperture is not the best. It can be anywhere from a 2.8, which is fantastic, but it can also be something variable like a 4 to 5.6 or 5.6 to 6. There can be a lot of different things or attributes in those lenses that don't allow for the most amount of light, which then makes your job as a photographer or videographer a little tough. So pros and cons of both. Last one I'll talk about before I talk about what you need is the travel lens. Travel lens is a great option as well. I get people who come in, they've invested a lot of money into different camera equipment for safari or for just everyday use. Now they're going on this big trip where they're going to be seeing safari animals, or they're going to go to another country where they need zoom. A travel lens is a great companion to have because it can do all the zooming that you need or that's required of you without you necessarily needing to buy 5 lenses to get the job of one done. So this is a great option for someone who is trying to really get into photography, the zoom capabilities, without necessarily looking to buy 5 or 6 lenses that do all the same thing. So travel lenses, fantastic. What lenses do you need? And I put quotations around there because we really don't need any of these lenses. It's more of a want. However, as you become more experienced and a better photographer, you're going to learn real fast of what is good for you and what's not good for you and what you should have in your arsenal. And what I think that every photographer should have are these three lenses, which we all as photographers call it the Trinity. 50mm prime, your nifty 50. Now this can be interchanged with a 35, an 85, a 75, whatever works best for you. 24-70 is one of my personal favorites. It's a street walking, everyday type of lens. 24-70 gives you good wide angle, good zoom. You can get good portraits, but you can also take landscape or interior shots as you're walking around. Typically one of the most popular lenses on the market, and there's constantly newer and newer versions coming out every few years. 70-200 is another good one. The reason being is that it takes right off after the 24-70 is done. Now you can zoom and get everything in the distance. 70-85 can give you a decent portrait, and now you've got the eagle flying in the distance. You're at Yosemite National Park. You want to get that shot. The 70-200 is going to be the best way to do it. So there's a lot of good lenses out there. There's a lot of good products. However, it's just narrowing it down and figuring out what you need to get the best or to get the most out of your photography. Use the timer or the camera app. Like I said earlier, with the drive mode button, you're able to now use an app on your phone or your tablet to control the camera, and it's a really beneficial thing to have and use just because it gives you a really good optimization of the product that you bought, but it also puts everything at ease and at your fingertips. Last thing I'll talk about before I leave you guys is the content creation at a glance. So when it comes to making videos or content for social media, a few things to look at or keep in mind. Video quality is a big one. Have proper lenses or proper camera bodies and settings, stabilizations, having tripods and gimbals, lights, on-camera lighting, studio lighting, or even natural lighting, and mics, shotgun mics, on-camera mics, wireless mics, whatever helps you get the job done. Keep in mind that video lighting and microphones or audio quality are the three most important aspects to a video. Two of these can be on point and good. One can be bad if you're on a budget. Think about it really hard. Think about it thoroughly before you start investing and putting all this money into other products and new products, because it's important at the end of the day that you get the right products for what it is you're trying to get done and use. Easy ways to get into content creation without blowing all your money. There's these content creation kits. A lot of brands are making them. Some don't anymore, but for the most part, they're becoming more and more popular, especially as people on YouTube and social medias and all the different stuff keep growing and getting bigger and bigger. These content creation kits are becoming great ways for young people or just people in general to get into this hobby or to get into this profession without spending all of their money on equipment that they might not even understand yet. So again, listen to your friends who do it, listen to colleagues, customers, co-workers, anybody who has something to tell you on this stuff. But sometimes going simpler to start and then growing as you get bigger and bigger is the best way to go about it without spending too much. Now, I have my recommended accessories here. This is what I tell everybody about. Let me just be honest with you. The top 5 are a must. The rest of it can be a thought process for you. Get a bag. Protect that equipment that you just purchased. You spent a lot of money buying camera equipment. You might as well buy some sort of bag to protect everything. An extra battery is always a great idea, much like an extra memory card. If you forgot to charge something last night, having that backup battery is better than having to sit there and wait 45 minutes to let your camera charge up, or to go all the way back to a hotel room or wherever it is to charge your equipment so you can use it. Same idea with a memory card. You're out and about taking photos and videos, and all of a sudden now your card doesn't work on you. It'd be a real shame for you to have to basically not use or forego using your camera, all because you don't have another memory card. A lens cleaning kit, I think, is a simple one. They're not that expensive. I have a nicer one for 30 bucks. You can find ones for $8. Really, all it is you're just protecting your lens and your equipment. Don't use your sweater or your t-shirt to clean that up. Use a nice product like a lens cleaning cloth, like you find for your eyeglasses or for your TV, that will not damage your product, but also just make sure that it's cleaned and polished for use. And then have a camera strap. Again, I always am someone who, when I put stuff down, I forget I put it down. At least with the camera strap around my neck, I know that the camera's there with me the whole time. So it's definitely something I think that's a necessary piece. Tripods are great, good stabilization. External hard drives are great, great ways to save the photos without having to use cloud-based solutions. Filters for your cameras are fantastic. They go over the lens, they make sure they cut or reduce light. Additional lenses exist out there for a reason. You can buy lenses as you feel that they're needed. And classes and workshops. I'm one resource, guys. I'm always more than helpful, more than happy to help too. However, I'm not always available. I was sick yesterday, I'm still sick today. But classes and workshops exist out there for you, the photographer, to continuously soak up information on this new hobby or project or this piece of work that you're trying to do for business or for pleasure, whatever it is. So take the time, take the classes, read everything you can on the products, familiarize yourself as you go. You'll never regret it. It is a really amazing thing, but always be a forever student when it comes to learning knowledge and information on this sort of thing. The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of a low price is forgotten. Take a deal where you can get a deal, save money where you can, but never compromise on something that you want. Work hard for it, save up, continuously push until you get exactly what it is you need product-wise or just feature-wise, whatever it is. Because at the end of the day, you might have gotten a great deal on something that you think will do what you're trying to do, but it's not the thing that you spent the time researching for, studying up on, looking into. So just to take a deal when you see a deal without really understanding what it is you're getting a deal on, you'll remember that beautiful price, but the bitterness of the poor quality of whatever product or thing you purchased is going to stay there long after that sweetness of a low price is forgotten. I do love this quote. In photography specifically, it's a big deal. Photography, I've seen guys with very lesser camera setups do successfully well with photography. But again, like blurry photos and like images that don't make sense, we are not those artists. We're starting photographers, we're starting videographers who need to have the classical training, the equipment that will suit us the best before we can try to jump into these avant-garde and abstract concepts. And that is all I got for you guys. Next week is the intermediate camera class. So week 2, this will be on Thursday next week. So, and I will be here for that. I won't be sick this time. We're going to do that on the 13th. February 13th. Next week will be the intermediate camera class. I'll give you guys a couple more minutes. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can chat away right now. I'll answer it live. If not, I'm going to jump off in a couple minutes. All right, well, I gave it a little more time there. Nobody seems to have any questions for me. Everybody, thanks for joining. Oh my God, my voice is getting worse and worse. Thanks for being out here. Thanks for enjoying. My name is Saxon. I appreciate everybody. I'm sorry I was sick yesterday, still sick today, but we're getting through it. Next Thursday, February 13th, we will have the intermediate camera class. That'll be the second one for the month. That one we're going to go over manual control of the camera, and some other features that you should know, and really kind of get more involved with it. If any comments, questions, or concerns come up, you have my phone number, my email. Give me a call anytime. Worst case scenario, call into the store, ask for myself or the small electronics department. We'll take care of you and answer any camera questions that